Welcome everyone to Rules Explained. In this episode, we're going over the game Boot Hill, a 1975 classic role-playing game. I'm John Merritt.
I'm Rob Nothing.
And let's get started. So Boot Hill. I brought this up. Rob said he immediately said he loved the cover. Why? What is it about this cover that you love?
As anybody who's been watching and listening to us will be able to attest to, I like anything that is old, which is why I really like myself. But nonetheless, beyond that, it's just there's something very, very nostalgic about this. Not just nostalgic from me as a role player or a gamer, but just as the font and the colors being used, which suggest the Old West. It just cries out the Old West. There are very few covers that actually do a very good job, in my opinion, of capturing the mood of a game. And you could argue, for example, if you're taking a look at other TSR titles or other titles of any other role-playing game, that there was a Star Trek role-playing game in the 1980s and 90s that did a pretty good job of conveying what kind of setting you'd be in, and of course Gamma World, another TSR, did a pretty darn good job of just drawing you into the world with the box. And I think that's it. And even something as minimalist as the Traveler game did a very good job of drawing you in. I mean, even if you didn't have any flashy thing on the front besides the words Traveler and very bold red letters on a black background, you flip the box over to figure out what the game was about, and suddenly you're reading some stressed out guy communicating his dire distress as he's being attacked by space pirates. So again, the box does everything to go ahead and draw you in, and that just draws you in. There's several things suggesting what this game is about: shootouts, gambling. The West, it's not distinct. It's a little surreal in some ways.
There's a lot of tropes here.
What's that?
I said there's a lot of tropes here. The gambling, the gunfight. I mean, this is like out of the movies.
And of course, if you do go ahead and look for this game, you can find it on Drive-Thru RPG. You can still buy this in its printed format with a print on demand. But I always find this interesting because Wizards of the Coast / Hasbro has, for all their TSR product, all their older TSR products, a warning saying that these games were all made back in the day where people weren't as politically correct. They don't phrase it that way, but that's what they say in the warning. And they say, please don't get mad at us if you find something offensive. And I looked at this cover and I read the books again after reading that, and I'm like, okay, I can actually see where, in today's audience, people would be just a little disappointed with their choice with tropes, just like you said.
Yeah, I mean, this game, like you said, Wizards of the Coast, it's originally TSR.
Yes.
This version, we have the second edition we're looking at. The first edition was, 1973 by Gary Gygax and Don Kaye.
This game was published, from what I remember, it was 75, but anyway, that's potatoes. But it was a long time ago, and it was printed in the digest format, much like the D&D books, and much like many of the other miniature games rules that were out there. And it was very limited in its scope. And in fact, even the second edition that we're looking at now is very limited in its scope.
1975.
It is basically, sorry?
1975.
Yeah. It was basically, it is, and it still is in the first and second editions, it is basically a combat system set for Wild West. There are some role-playing elements, and that's perhaps why the game was not as popular as, say, like D&D or Star Frontiers or Traveler, for that matter, because there was very limited in the sense of what can you do outside of the shootout. What can your characters do except for slinging lead?
Yeah, you know what? I screwed up. The first edition came out in 75. You are correct. The second edition was 79.
Yep.
And then they came out with the third edition in 1990.
And the third edition was almost a complete rewrite, and it addressed many of those issues that I just mentioned as far as, having role-playing opportunities and other things for the characters to do. But interestingly enough, they really went into this very detailed combat system in which it was measured second by second, with each individual segment of movement being carefully calibrated, and the drawing of the weapons and so on and so forth. But we're not going to discuss third edition today. We're going to focus our attention on second edition.
So it starts off with you step from the cool shadows of the Long Branch Saloon in the midday heat of Promise City. Loosening your Colt in its holster, you look down Main Street and spot the leather and denim-clad stranger who you called out. Citizens of the town scramble for cover as they sense the forthcoming battle. Dude, this sounds like straight out of the movies. I mean, 79, yes. 75, 79, there were still a lot of cowboy movies on TV. I remember watching Bonanza and the Lone Ranger, and I mean, sure, there were tons of them. Gary Gygax, as we know, was one of the creators for Dungeons and Dragons, and then his second game, was this his second game that he created, Boot Hill?
Well, as far as role playing,
yeah.
I believe so. I'd have to double check that, but I'm thinking back, and there would be some argument about TSR's order of role playing games with D&D, and then of course Empire of the Petal Throne, Metamorphosis Alpha. But I think this would be, if you're just asking if this was his second role playing game, I would have to say I bet you it is.
Probably. I mean, but Westerns are very popular, and it sounds like straight out of a movie. I don't know how realistic this is as it pertains to like what actually happened, but yes, it sets a cool mood. You're in a Western, and this is TSR Hobbies, still in Lake Geneva.
Mm-hmm. Well, just like you said, these games are designed, even the miniatures rules that were produced, ad infinitum during this time period, and even the board games from Avalon Hill and SPI, there was a strong sense that you knew the time period and the archetypes and tropes and ideas of whatever game that you were playing. So if I picked up Dungeons & Dragons, I must be a fantasy fan and know all about orcs and goblins and so on and so forth, and dragons and such. If I picked up Top Secret, which was a game that came out
I forgot about
a little bit after this. We might want to do that too, by the way.
No kidding.
But you knew about the spies, and you knew about Cold War situation. Same with Boot Hill. So you don't find a lot of background in any of this, or not a lot of descriptions as far as how you set up a campaign or what kind of stories you should set. So the idea is this is a set of rules to facilitate your imagination and your players to go ahead and create these backdrops, these settings, and so on and so forth.
So here we have a picture of what I'm assuming is Gygax. Buckshot
yes,
Bloom.
You're talking about. Wait, which one are you looking at? I'm sorry, I can't see the screen because I am in bad shape. Nope, that's Brian Bloom.
Oh, okay. Buckshot Bloom.
Yeah. Yep, one of the co-creators of the game system.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
So there's still a $500 reward on him. Miniatures, figures, Western guns. Got the players.
Yeah, and this was very popular as well. Making sure that you had a supported line of miniatures, and Grenadier, which would become a major supporter of the Dungeons & Dragons line, would create all these box sets so you could go ahead and have your little miniatures instead of cardboard counters.
That's cool. And then here we had an advertisement for Gen Con.
Yes.
Which we will be at this year. The American's premier game convention and trade show, back when it was still in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin.
Yep,
that
Lake Geneva.
They have
you
an
can still go
for
to
right in the game.
Yep, you can still see the original building, which the first Gen Cons were at Lake Geneva.
I think this is funny. They have advertisements for other role-playing games from TSR, like the basic Dungeons & Dragons Complete Basic Game Set.
I love that price, $9.95. You can't buy that. You can't buy a complete version of that for under $150 now.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, sometimes the dice go for $200.
God, I wish I still had mine. All right, it's based on Dragons, more Boot Hill. So the game came out in '75. It was a hit. We've got the gaming conventions, beginning to take off, because Gen Con started in what? Was it around? It was mid 70s,
Oh,
wasn't it?
Gen Con goes back to '67.
Really? Wow. I didn't
Yeah,
know it went back
yeah,
that
they were
far.
doing it was all war games back then, and it was local people from Geneva, trying
Hmm.
Lake Geneva, I should say, trying to go ahead and engage in military gaming, and they all got together and they not only, of course, played games, but they threw ideas off of one another, which is one of the stories behind the creation of Dungeons and Dragons. It basically bloomed out of a variety of different games, like for example, the Siege of Brodenburg and Barons of Braunstein, and then of course eventually Chainmail, which is one of the episodes we did.
We
In
did.
case you're looking for a little background on D&D itself.
Now, the game, it says Boot Hill is designed to function as a game in two ways: as a set of rules for man to man gunfighting action, and an outline guide for setting up quasi historical or fictional role playing campaigns for an ongoing series of continuing events. So it started off by, it sounds like, to give you a gunfight right out of the movies, and then to,
Right.
keep an ongoing campaign going. I mean, I would almost say that's one thing, but I guess, this is early on. They're kind of defining it as two things.
Well, and that's a very good point because I really think that this game started itself off as a miniatures rule set for man-to-man combat
Yeah.
in the Wild West. And then they decided, as games like D&D or going back to that Siege, I should say, Barons of Braunstein and so on and so forth, people like, wait, can't I just go ahead and control this one guy instead of six or seven guys in the gang and say this is my guy and I'm going to have him go in the bar first? And so people started to develop that, and there are very ancillary rules and very basic rules for things like intoxication and wilderness travel. But if you're looking for like encounter tables, or if you're looking for statistics on a bear or a lion, or if you're looking to go ahead and look for reaction tables, either even to determine how the people are reacting to you when you come across them, you won't find any of that here like you would in a traditional role playing game. So
Uh
there's a
huh.
lot that the referee and players have to kind of make up as they go. Now, in supplements that followed, and modules that followed, they kind of added these elements in that I just mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, it was the basic game that you have here. Go out and shoot, and then come up with some really interesting stories in between the shootouts.
Well, that brings us into the rules. So let's start on our deep dive. So in our deep dive, we start off with basic rules for the game.
Yep.
It says basic rules. I'm presuming there will be more rules other than just basic rules.
Yep.
But we start off with tactical tabletop play, which, as you said before, the gaming scene at the time in the mid 70s, a lot of it was still tabletop gaming. The idea of a role playing game was still relatively new.
Yes.
So we start off with tactical tabletop play, man-to-man games on tabletop or town map. As you saw, I kind of flipped through the. Let me go back up.
Yeah, the original game came with a map with a grid.
This map was just.
Yeah. Oh, here you go. You just
This
passed the
is,
grid.
here's the map.
Yeah, there's that. This was one of the complaints many people had about the game. Is unlike any other TSR game, that was it. I mean, you didn't get anything else besides a few locations. But in my opinion, this was kind of the appeal. I can fill this and populate this any way I want. Do I want this to be a sparse frontier area? Well, maybe those are the only two towns here. Do I want this to be more developed? Do I want more railroads? Do I want this to be farmland? I get to decide. So I didn't have a problem with this, although a few people did.
Well, I wondered if this was actually based off Boot Hill, the town. I mean, there actually is a town called Boot Hill with Wyatt Earp Street going right down the middle of it, with the
Right,
saloon where there was a
and
big shootout.
the term boot hill is, of course, something that's coming out of this time period, indicating the cemeteries.
Yes.
So I don't know if it was, I don't know if this map is based upon that city. I think they kind of took a few places and mishmashed them together, as well
Mm-hmm.
as the typical ways that a city streets and these towns would look like back in the 1800s, late 1800s.
And of course, they give us a nice example of how to create your own town with the streets and what stores might be available to you. But we start off with the basic rules. So the basic rules begin with the setting, how is it played? Did I fly through it? No. So that's the introduction. We talked about that. There we go, basic rules.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked about campaign play, the basic rules, setting up game characters. It seems like all games that we seem to have, there seems to be like a basic structure to these rules of our role-playing games. It starts off with, here's the game, and then here's how to create a character within the game.
Yes, if you're going to go ahead and if you're going to have a tactical game based upon men fighting men, women, people fighting people, if you're going to have that type of game, you usually want to give them some sort of statistics.
Sure.
Even games like, for example, the bigger part, but Patrol and Sniper that SPI came out with, gave your soldiers some sort of individual ratings as far as their elan, their spirit, and their fighting capabilities. So as you'll see in the next page, we're going to go ahead and go a little bit more detail than just your basic fighting characteristics, like what weapon they have and their bravery. We're going to go ahead and give them all sorts of characteristics, but not as many as you would think for a role-playing game.
I found these statistics to be really interesting because it's not just your basic strength, dex, constitution, charisma. It's speed, gun accuracy, strength, bravery, and experience, which I thought was an interesting one, which we'll have to touch upon.
Everything that you need to know how a person would perform in a gunfight or a saloon fight is the only stats you have here.
That's it.
That's it.
So when I determine my speed, I roll a percentile die.
Yep.
Let's say I roll a 65. So I roll a 65, I am very quick, and I have a +6.
Yep.
I mean, is that all I put down on the character sheet?
That's all you're going to put down on the character sheet. As a matter of fact, you probably don't need the descriptor. All you should probably put down is the percentage score and then the ability score.
Oh, okay. So the stats are a percentage then.
No, the stats are just the stats are just modifiers to game functions.
Oh, okay.
You will probably never have to go ahead and roll this. Now, if you have a clever referee, the game master, they might ask you to go ahead and, if you wanted to race against somebody else, why don't you roll your speed versus his speed or her speed and see who gets there first. That's why you should probably put down the die score. But the reality is that those ability scores that you see there are the most important ones for the play of the game.
Now, for an ability score roll, are we rolling a D20, a D10, percentile dice, and then we add the ability?
D10s and percentiles.
Okay. And then we have the gun accuracy, which includes knives, spears, and bows. This is a really important one.
Gun accuracy and throwing accuracy, 2 separate scores.
Oh, they're 2 separate.
Yep.
Oh, and throwing accuracy. Okay, so we have gun accuracy and throwing accuracy, just using the same table. We have eye drops. And eye drops has nothing to do with what we're actually talking about, but my wife forgot to get them from the store, so not a big deal. We have strength, bravery, and experience. What is experience? What does that do?
Just like you would think, in a role-playing game, there's usually some sort of way to measure a character's progression. In this game, it's very unique, though. You could start out, as you can see, with an extreme amount of experience. You might be a very experienced gunfighter. But suffice to say, that will determine first shot, that will determine your accuracy, and so on and so forth, because that represents how many times you have fired that weapon or thrown that weapon, for that case, for throwing accuracy. So it's a bit vague. It focuses a lot on gunfights, but you got to assume that it might also apply to throwing accuracy. But it can go up, But the most strange fact about it is that you will probably not start out as a novice unless you're just really bad at rolling percentile dice. On average, you'll probably at least have 1 or 2 gunfights under your belt, and you'll be able to progress from there.
Okay, but what does that mean? I have a couple gunfights. I mean, let's say I roll, the dice, 1 to 40, 40 to 60. I have a I have a 60% probability of getting, under 60. But those are the 2 major categories. 0 to 40, 40 to 60 seem to be the biggest jump.
Right.
So the probability of me getting a previous number of gunfights of 1 to 2 is pretty good. So the ability modify. So what does that do for me? I mean, I have an ability score of -5. What does that mean?
That will reduce your chance to hit because you're not, even if you
Oh,
have
okay, okay,
an
okay.
innate gun accuracy, because of your inexperience, you are going to be nervous. You're going to be, your gun might be shaking. You may not
Okay.
know how to go ahead and line up the iron versus the trigger and all that other stuff that people keep talking about when they talk about how to aim a weapon. So because of your experience, even though your innate accuracy, like if you're just doing target shooting, you would just use your regular ability. But if you're in the middle of a gunfight, you're going to have a modifier there because you're just not that you're
Experience,
just
yep.
not that proficient, and you're just not that
Okay.
experienced with what combat actually entails.
So this is a modifier to the ability. Well,
To hit.
modifier.
Yep. Lots of
Okay.
modifiers.
Lots of modifiers. So improving character abilities. The ability of a character can be improved both initially for player characters and through experience gained by surviving gunfights for all characters. Yes, that is a key factor. You must survive the gunfight in order to get experience.
Which is tough in this game, as we'll discuss later.
Okay, so keeping track of the percentile die roll that you originally rolled is very important. So, how do you how do you improve your abilities? We're in a gunfight. We're over. I survived. The GM gives out experience.
No, you basically get experience by surviving gunfights, and there's no like experience points per se.
Uh huh.
So as you survive gunfights, if you skip down there to survival modifications, all characters,
Uh huh.
okay? So every time you survive a gunfight, the percentile dice scores, that's why you keep track of the percentile scores,
Mm-hmm.
will increase based upon the current score. So
Oh,
surviving
okay,
a
okay, okay.
gunfight, if you're really weak, is going to give you some more bonuses, but as you get higher and higher,
Okay.
it gets increasingly more difficult. And if you notice, if you're at 96 or higher, doesn't matter how many gunfights you survive, you just won't have any increase. You're
You have
you're already at
maxed
your
out.
max.
Okay, so
Yep,
if my gun accuracy was 14 and I survived a
yep.
gunfight, I would
Go up
add
to
3
17.
to 14. So
Yep,
it would go to a 17,
yep.
which would bump
And then you
me
go
up.
back to the chart and you look at the chart and you go, oh, I went from poor to below average. So my ability score went from -6 to -3.
Gotcha. That's pretty cool. I kind of like that. And then, of
Yeah.
course, we have equipping the character. Time to go shopping.
Again, anytime you want to know what the game's focus is, look at their equipment charts.
Good point. This is like all weapons and
Knife,
horses.
derringer, revolver, gun, 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 gun,
Gun,
gun,
gun, gun,
gun,
gun,
gun,
gun,
gun,
gun.
gun, 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 bigger gun, gun, gun.
Okay, now we have
Horse.
base numbers, first shot and to hit. First shot determines who goes first.
Yep.
How
So
do
this
we
is your
determine who goes
initiative, if you
first?
wish.
Okay, initiative. Let's see. To determine the base number for a character's first shot score, you add the character's speed ability score, bravery speed modifier, and the weapon speed modifier. So you add all these modifiers together. Bravery speed, and are
And
determined by the speed and bravery ability table given previously. Blah blah blah. And then what? Whoever has highest goes first. You roll a d10,
yep.
and then add that modifier to it.
Nope. That's who goes first.
That's it.
Just the number.
And then the weapon speed actually plays a factor too. So you take the modifiers, add them all together,
Hmm.
and then add in the weapon speed of the weapon speed class of the weapon,
Hmm.
and now hit determination. To determine the base number for a character's hit determination score, you add the character's accuracy, ability, bravery, accuracy modifier, and experience accuracy modifier. If the total hit, add to this total, add 50 to determine the base number needed to hit an opponent and the weapon, which will be a separate number for firearms as opposed to throw. Okay, so give me an example of this. So it's saying
Well,
take all the modifiers, add them together,
yes.
add 50,
Yeah.
and that's what you need to hit. So you need to get less than that. So in this game, low number rolls to hit are good, right?
Yes. So it's a percentile game.
Right.
And here's where things also get a bit disappointing. Because if you take a look back at the accuracy for gun accuracy, If I am a good shot, I have a +7 to hit. Okay.
Okay.
And if I have survived 5 gunshots, or I should say gunfights, I have a +2 modifier. So now I'm at +9, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now if you go ahead and take, oh, bravery. I'm sorry, I forgot about bravery. So let's say I'm average bravery. Let's say a 0. So I'm at a +9. So all of those factors together,
Oh,
I'm
and the
an
weapon.
average person with bravery. I'm a pretty good shot. I've been in a few gunfights, and all I get is a +9.
Well, and the weapon.
And you might say to yourself, well, no, there's no weapon modifier per se.
Oh, yes, there is. There's a single action revolver is a fast weapon, and the fast weapon gives you a +8.
Only to the initiative.
Oh, that's initiative. Okay, so that only determines first shot. Okay, I gotcha.
Hmm? So
Gotcha.
again, so I have a +9 to hit, and I add 50. That's 59. So now think about that. You might say, okay, that's not too bad. That's fairly realistic. A 59% chance
Mm-hmm.
to shoot somebody that's a few feet in front of me or whatever. But if you look at all those charts again, if I was now shooting in a shootout with somebody who was an average, as far not even average, let's say a poor shot, okay, and with the same number of survived gunfights, they have, let's see here, we got a -6 versus a +2, that's a -4. So they're at a 46% chance. So despite the fact that this guy is much weaker in his accuracy, the difference in our chances to hit are less than 10%. This is
True.
where
Good
people
point.
are a little bit like, wait a minute, that doesn't seem to go ahead. That seems counterintuitive. But I guess in a gunfight where you're that close, and if there's two people just standing right next to each other, it's going to come down to actually not so much your training, but who actually gets off the first shot.
Good point. Which is why that first shot is really important.
Yes.
Okay, so now so we ran through the examples. So the turn sequence. So we random movement determination. Players roll percentile dice and move in the indicated order. Low numbers move first, high numbers move last. Okay, so that's what they mean by the random movement. I thought it was a drunk like walking around or something.
Yeah. So if you're not shooting, you just randomly determine initiative, which is kind of interesting because your speed doesn't come into effect because I don't know, maybe that's shit. They're just saying that that's your drawing speed. And again, all those statistics are very focused on gunfighting. But if you have a good DM, I shouldn't say it that way, but if you have a referee who is thinking outside the box, they'd say, well, wait, that speed you just indicated could indicate also your quickness of action. So maybe it should be added to this random movement determination.
Mm-hmm. So firing resolution, players state which characters are firing and indicate target and number of shots. Firing order is determined by the speed. Each character fires in his turn, and percentile dice are rolled for hit or miss. Characters who are hit suffer varying effects of wounds. You see, that's one thing I didn't see. I didn't see hit points. I didn't see stamina. I didn't see any of that.
Okay, go back to strength.
Uh huh.
That's how much damage you can take.
Your ability score. Oh, that's it.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Now, if you go forward
Mm-hmm.
to page 9, I want to say, or is it 10? 10.
10. All
This
right.
is going to surprise a lot of
Jumping
people.
ahead
There are
here.
no damage charts for weapons. Every weapon is going to have the same chance of doing the same effects.
Oh.
So there you have it. It's
Shotgun
not the
scanner.
weapon that
Oh, the
matters
wound
in
chart.
any
Here it is.
way,
Okay.
shape, or form. Normally. Let me just say that way. Normally. I could be firing a Derringer, I could be firing a shotgun, I could be firing a Colt, I could be firing a Remington. It does not matter. What happens next, if I hit, is you roll for hit location, very detailed, leg, hand, shoulder, abdomen, chest, head. Okay? Then that will determine the possibility of how severe the wound will be. So if you've noticed, if I get hit in the head, there's a very low probability it's going to be a low impact wound. As a
True.
matter of fact, it's more than 50% that will be an instantly fatal wound.
Mortal wound.
No hit points are subtracted. If you roll a mortal wound,
You're dead.
that character is dead.
No invulnerable saves.
No. And this is what people also had a slight difficulty with, because if you want an ongoing campaign in which the sole determination is is about you getting better as a character is how many gunfights you survived. Wow.
Well,
It
Wild
doesn't
West was
seem like
dangerous.
you're going to survive very many.
Yeah, no kidding.
But again, a good referee, this is what we talk about over and over again, John. A good referee can take this game and make it into something exciting by just adding anything in there to minimize the chances of a hero dying. You know,
Oh, sure.
we could have, mortals, or I should say, saving throws. We could even add in elements of hero-like points. You know, those have been around for a while. Those types of points that can go ahead and save you. Top Secret was one of the innovators in creating fame and fortune points, which were used to go ahead and save characters and modify dice rolls.
Uh-huh. See, then we have our movement. Now, is this like the number of squares that you move?
Yep. Or
All right.
inches if you're using tabletop.
Okay. Outdoor terrain, mounting and dismounting. That sounds important.
Yep. And if you're going to have Western game, you better talk about horses.
Oh, yeah. Let's see, then we have combat. The weapons boot hill are represented various weapons used in the West from the times following the Civil War until about 1900. Each type of weapon can be employed up to its maximum range, although effectiveness will decrease as the target increases in range.
Now, here's where your weapon choice will make a big difference, depending on the weapon's speed, its range, its rate of fire, its reload rate. So this is where, because most of the time when people choose weapons in a role-playing game, they look for damage.
Oh, yes.
That's what they're looking for.
Yes,
how much damage does this weapon do so I can go ahead and maximum? This game, that takes all that out. Now you have to think carefully. What am I trying to achieve? Am I going to be, sniping people away from behind cover? Well, then I don't need a fast weapon. I need a long-range weapon. Am I going to be, in the middle of a bar trying to go and draw my gun against somebody else? I better have a quicker weapon. Am I going to be in a prolonged gunfight? I better have a lot of ammunition, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I call that big numberitis. I just look at the stats and I min-max it, and I don't like min-maxing. I think it just takes away from the entire game. I think the narrative is more important than the actual mechanics. Just personal opinion. Then we have observation and sighting, which is probably used to determine range.
Yeah, this game, your actual facing is very important. You can only shoot at targets within that 45-degree arc.
Then we have the first shot determination chart, but I thought we went over that already.
Yes, we did. We kind of glossed over it really quickly, but now here's all the modifiers to your hits.
Wow.
And as you can see, it starts mounting up very quickly as far as the number of minuses.
Wow. Then wounds. This is what I was talking about with the wounds earlier. So the wounds, So do you roll, or is it a set damage? Oh, okay. You roll on this table.
Yes.
I
so
see.
For every time you get shot, for everything that's hit your body, you roll a percentile dice for location and percentile dice for intensity of the wound.
So you're either taking
By the way,
-3, -7, or you're dead.
Right.
No rolling damage. You roll either 3, 7, or dead.
As a referee, I the first thing I did to modify this game was to simplify this wound chart, because otherwise you're rolling percentile dice all the time, and it really bogs things down. So I converted this wound chart into a D10 for location and then a D10 for wound.
Oh, funny.
So that we can just roll 2d10, and you're going to know instantaneously the location and the intensity of that wound.
That's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Why don't we pause it here, and we can pick this up next week. We can begin with brawls, because we've been going now for about 30 minutes at least. So with that, we're going to pause at brawls. We'll come back and we'll pick it up next week. I want to thank everyone for listening, and I'm John Merritt.
I'm Rob Nothing.
Thanks for listening.
Adios.